Hi, this is Bob Baker. Welcome to The Creative Entrepreneur. Before we jump into this latest interview, I just want to make sure that you don't miss any of the awesome interviews that I'm posting, nearly one every week. It's really easy to stay informed. You can get on the VIP email list. It's free, and I'll send you an email every time I post a new interview. Just go to DIYcareermanifesto.com, get on the email list, and you're set. And another cool perk to getting on the list is that I will also send you a big, fat, free sample of my new book called The DIY Career Manifesto. It's the unconventional guide to turning your talents and your know-how into a profitable business, just like a lot of the people that I interview. So get on the list, DIYcareermanifesto.com. And now on to this week's interview. Hello, it's Bob Baker here with another episode of The Creative Entrepreneur. And today I am really excited to be talking to someone who I have been following, has been sort of maybe even unbeknownst to her, as sort of a mentor early on and still to this day. I'm talking about Barbara Winter. Hello, Barbara. How are you?
I am great, Bob.
Fantastic. Now, we have sort of, I've been aware of your efforts for quite a long time, and we've corresponded off and on here over the years. I'm thinking going back to the 90s, perhaps.
All the time. I think you had some articles in my newsletter long ago.
Right, and,
so, yeah.
And your newsletter, which is called Winning Ways, which you, how long have you been publishing that now? I know you had an anniversary in recent years.
I think we're 28 or 9 years. I'm not sure.
So closing in on 30 years of publishing the Winning Ways newsletter. And that's still a print. I know it started off as a print publication, and it still is, right?
Still print, and I still get emails from people asking if it's electronic. But I tell people, when you subscribe, get a 3-ring binder and save them, because this information is useful over and over and over again. I go back and reread stuff all the time and go, I didn't remember I wrote this.
Right.
And this, so
it's new to you all over
really
again.
Meant to be permanent. And every time I mention that on Facebook or someplace, I always have subscribers say, oh, please keep it in print. So
well, awesome. Well, I mean, the Winning Ways has been a consistent thing you've done for a long time, but that's just one of many related things that you do. I'm just going to read like a couple of sentences that I pulled off of your website. This says, Barbara J. Winter is a pioneering self-employment advocate, writer, and teacher who has spent the last 25 years, or perhaps more by now, pondering the question, why aren't we all self-employed?
I still ponder that question.
That's a pretty cool question. Well, wouldn't you agree that some people are probably not cut out for the self-employment route, and maybe maybe that's a blessing that there are people that maybe thrive more in an environment?
It's the way I feel about, I think everyone should travel, but when I'm in a crowded airport, I think, gosh, I wish there weren't so many people out going today. So yes, of course there are people who should not be self-employed, but I think more people are capable of it than realize that.
I think give themselves.
And I think we have very limited notions about what it takes. I'm utterly fascinated that so many people now are talking about how introverts make great entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. That's almost the opposite of what we've thought, that you have to be real extroverted and brassy and pushy and all those things. And the truth is that being an entrepreneur, there's no job description, and that we can create it in our own image, really. Mm-hmm. By really getting to know ourselves and creating a business that just fits us perfectly.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you said that about because I think there's a stereotype about the entrepreneur, and I've often said myself, and in fact, in this new book that I've written, it's available now on Amazon, called the DIY Career Manifesto, or at least an early version of it is available. I do write about how I'm not, even though I guess there are aspects of me that are extroverted, and I have a balance between, there's definitely, I like spending time alone, there's there's a shy part of me, but there's also a stage performer part of me too. But from a business perspective, I am not the typical power lunch, type A driven, hey, let's make a deal, kind of guy. I'm more of a laid back creative type, but I found a way still to design a life that's right for me without having those qualities.
Exactly. And I would describe myself the same way. I like being alone, and I love being around other people. And that's always been the challenge and actually fun part of my business is how to keep that in balance.
Right.
If I am alone too much, then I, start getting misty-eyed when an airplane flies over. And if I've got too jam-packed seminar schedule, so I'm not having breaks in between, I get really exhausted. So it's, how do you
Right. It's a balance.
make room for all those things? And that is what our career counseling has failed to recognize, that most of us have so many selves in ourself, and we can make room for all of them. And that I don't know another way to do that besides creating your own operation.
Very cool. Now, I know that you're the author of a book that I got of yours long ago. It's called Making a Living Without a Job, and I actually have a really early version of it.
You got the original.
That's right. You signed it there for Bob. Live your dreams. And so I probably ordered this many years ago. But I wanted to share something with you that I didn't even tell you that I was going to do. There's a couple of things, and I've actually mentioned this in workshops here in there. But there's something that I've often said to people as an author. I always remember what it's like to be a reader. Like when I'm writing books, I always remember those authors who touched me. And I've told the story many times in workshops and different places where there have been times where something I read in a book was the right time, the right place, and the light bulb went off when I actually had to put the book down and pace around the house and go it was like a eureka moment. You had this and I have to tell you that you provided one of those moments for me years ago, and it was in the introduction of your book. And so I've told this story many times, and it wasn't until recently that I said, I got to go back and see what that passage actually was. But I found it here, and it's basically, let's see if you remember this. It's something that you wrote a while back. But it basically says, the joyfully jobless often pursue lines of work that make a difference to the rest of the world, that are more than just a way to earn food, to eat, and a roof over our heads. We see our business as a natural extension of who we are and what we love to do. We spend time and energy exploring and understanding ourselves so that we can find ways to earn a living by being ourselves. And there was something about that line about by making a living being who you are that just really resonated with me. Of course, I don't have to try to mold or fit myself into become something that I'm not to make a living. It's just how can I take who I already am naturally and enhance that? And so I just want to thank you for providing one of those inspirational moments when I read that.
That sounds so obvious to me, but it is a well-kept secret.
Right.
And I think that the entrepreneurs that get my attention are being so much themselves that it's utterly fascinating. Just like it's utterly fascinating to sit down and talk to a stranger that has a story that is like nothing you've ever heard before. And that's really, that's the essence of it. And sometimes it's the hardest part of the journey, is being who we really are and really listening to our own sense of what is right and what's wrong for us. I just thought of this. I got an email one day from a friend of mine, and the title line said, I just turned down $10,000. And then in the first line it said, and it feels great. And he had a contract to write a book and was in the midst of it and just was like, no, this just isn't a subject that I can really do a good job with. And so he told me, the whole story. And then at the end, he said, I just had to write and tell you this because I needed to tell this to somebody I knew would understand it. And of course, I felt really humbled that he chose to share that with me. But I have never forgotten how powerful that was, that that he made a decision based on what was right for him. And most people would have thought, you got to be crazy, you're giving back $10,000. And it was like, yeah.
You got to be, just like Shakespeare said it best, do thine own self be true, right?
Yeah.
So as you mentioned, Barbara, the copy that I have of this book is a really early version, but it's been updated and it's been in print now for how many years?
20 years. We had an anniversary on July 15th. So, and it's funny because when I was writing it, my subtitle was Winning Ways for Creating Work That You Love in the 90s, I think.
Oh.
And my editor said, oh no, Barbara, this is going to have a long shelf life. And it came out in 93, and I thought, longer than the 90s? That's 7 years. That's a long time for a nonfiction book. So nobody's more surprised than me that it's been around this long. And even though the first version doesn't mention the internet and a lot of the tools we have that make it even easier for us to do what we do now, the basic philosophy is in that copy you've got. And so the updated version added things, but the kind of skeleton, when I went back and revised it, there were so many things that was like, no, that has not changed. That's exactly the tools that we still need to create our own right livelihood. I love that term of the Buddhists, right livelihood.
I do too. That is a Buddhist term. Yeah, I'm never sure of the origin of it. But yeah, making a living without a job, and now it's got does it have a yellow cover now? I think
it does, yeah. with a necktie being clipped. I don't have one right at my fingertips, but
that's okay. I'll try to throw up a shot of it in the video and link to it on maybe the Amazon page or to your website. I'll be linking to all the things that we talk about here.
I don't think my cord is long enough. It's only a few feet away to grab a copy, but I'll do it when we take a break.
Okay, that sounds good. And so I think one of the only things we didn't mention that I know is a big part of what you do is your live workshops. You've been doing these for years, and you have different topics that you talk about and go to city to city. One is establish yourself as an expert. Another, how to support your wanderlust, which I guess involves travel, which I know you love to do. And quite often you do these, we'll go to different cities and you'll do 3 different workshops within a couple of days, right?
Exactly. This year I tried an experiment called the Joyfully Jobless Weekend. And I just kind of threw it out to people on my mailing list and said, would anybody be interested in putting these together? Originally, when I was really getting going during the 90s, there were a lot of independent adult ed programs, and I loved teaching with them. Those were like little mom and pop businesses, and so it was really a match made in heaven. They also attracted people who were very curious. They offered short courses, so if you didn't have 6 weeks to devote to learning something, you could come in and get an overview. So it was just a wonderful fit. But as the internet got bigger, the adult ed business started to morph into other things, and so they disappeared. And I was really missing that. I really loved traveling around the country. So I just threw it out and was absolutely astonished at the response from people, most of whom had never organized an event before. Wow. And so it's been a really interesting experiment. I'm off to Philadelphia in a couple of weeks, and Ottawa and Boise, Idaho, places I have never been before. Well, Philly I've been, but
right.
Anyway, so that's been very interesting. I also really love doing longer events. I like inspiring people in beautiful places. So getting people, in a really nice spot like Sedona, or one of my favorite places I've ever done retreats is the Lake District in northern England, which is stunning.
Wow, that's fabulous.
And, taking them out of their normal environment for a couple days and really giving them some tools for growing themselves and their businesses. That's one of my favorite things to do.
Great. It almost sounds like you use what's typically like an indie music technique of reaching out to your fans and saying, "Hey, I'm going to be in the area," or does anybody know of a concert or a venue where our band can play? I don't hear a lot of authors doing that. Although I think more and more recently are tapping into their fan. But that helps to have a connection with your readers.
Yeah.
And have people that love you. And sometimes you just got to reach out and ask people for their help, and you'll be surprised at how many step up to the plate, right?
I was really surprised that I thought maybe 3 or 4, and it was more like 20 people.
Well, fantastic.
Jumped in.
Well, you have an illustrious career, Barbara, and you're the perfect interview subject for this whole series because it's about taking your passions and your know-how and turning it into a business and not only making a living but making a difference. So let's talk about some of the keys to your success. If you were to look back on the past 20 or 30 years or however long you've been at this,
I forget.
Yeah,
forget how many years it's been. A long time.
Right. So if you had to identify 3 maybe key factors that were responsible for this career that you've developed, what would they be?
Well, it almost sounds trite to say it because we hear it a lot. But the truth is, I think curiosity is huge for me. And I grew up with a father who just had an insatiable appetite for information. And I remember, dinner table conversations usually was him sharing what he had discovered in his reading or heard on the radio or TV that day. And he's been gone for quite a while now, but I just hope they have the internet in heaven because he is having a really good time if it's there. And so I think my siblings and I all grew up with a lot of curiosity, and I think that's absolutely essential, is just that, you just want to learn more and more and more and more. So I think that's a huge part of it, and it's never gone away. Curiosity gets bigger when you feed it. You don't get it satisfied because there's always something new to learn. And I think that also is a quality I find in really successful entrepreneurs, that they're lifelong learners and get so excited because when you start a business, you've given yourself a perfect excuse to keep learning. And that in any job I ever had, that was not the case. It was like, learn to do this and then just keep doing it. And it wasn't about growing and stretching and going farther and maybe even detouring along the way. So I think that, that curiosity, that desire to learn is a really big thing. I think another thing, although I certainly wasn't conscious of it at the time, was that I have always been willing to make mistakes. And I'm not terribly hard on myself when I do. And there's a terrific book that I read, maybe you've read it too, probably 5 years or so ago. I came across a book called The Art of Possibility by Benjamin Zander. Do you know that book?
I have not. I think I've heard of it, but I had...
Well, Benjamin Zander is actually a symphony conductor, and he also teaches music classes, I think, at a college in Boston. I might be a little wrong on those details. But he has something in there that I think is just brilliant. And he says when he teaches his students, when they make a mistake when they're playing, this is great for your musicians too, Bob, that instead of wincing, which is kind of our natural response when we make a mistake or play a wrong note, they are to stop, throw their arms up in the air and say, "How fascinating."
I like that.
I love that. And I think I have often found, with a couple of exceptions, that when I've made mistakes, that I was fascinated by it, because I think as a lifelong learner, you discover there are great lessons to learn from our mistakes. And we can't just sit and surmise about, well, what if this happens or this happens? We have to actually field test it. So that willingness to test things and to do it, though, on a fairly small scale.
Right.
And then it was like that worked. And I am a huge advocate of taking inventory regularly in our businesses, to stop every 90 days or so and say what's really working. Because sometimes we get so swept up in actually delivering the work that we don't really stand back and say, this is really working well. This feels really good. I want more of it. This, I think I'm kind of over it. And realize that it is an evolutionary process. And I don't think most people who start thinking about self-employment really have thought about that this is an evolutionary process, and that the business that you have, and I tell people in my seminars over and over again, the business you start out with isn't the business you end up with. Right. But start where you are and see where it takes you. And if you go into it knowing that it's going to evolve and change, and realize that sometimes you'll have an idea that's terrific for 6 months, and then the rest of the world kind of goes somewhere else, or you lose interest in it, that it's going to keep changing. And those are fabulous opportunities for growing ourselves and making our business more interesting to us.
Right. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in your book, I do remember one of the things from, even though it's been years since I read it, don't you talk about the analogy of like a spinning plates, where you get 1 or 2 plates spinning and up and operating, and then you add other streams of income. But over time, the one plate will either fall or crash, or you'll just take it down and add other plates so you're constantly adding things, experimenting with things, shifting things around.
And, I just did an article about, I grew up in a small town in southern Minnesota where everybody almost was self-employed, even though by the time I was going through school, we weren't getting prepared to work for ourselves. But I was thinking about Mr. Tetzloff, who had the local variety store, and it was kind of dimly lit. And he went to the store every day, and he stood there, and he sold penny candy. So it was a place we would go visit quite often. And he would stand behind the counter, never talk to us, take our money, and he did that every day. That is probably why I never thought I wanted to have a business, because I thought I'd have to stand in the same place and not even smile.
Well, thank God he was a role model of what not to do.
Exactly. But I think that is what's so exciting right now, and the internet has made it more visible that we see businesses that are nothing like the old notion of, you got to get space and you got to fill it with inventory and you got to stand behind the counter and sell things.
Right. So if I were to summarize some of the key points here that we talked about, is one of the factors to your success was a sense of curiosity, and while not every person takes the entrepreneurial role necessarily is a teacher, I love the lifelong learner thing, but I also have noticed that the most successful authors and teachers and workshop leaders and all that are also consider themselves students as much as teachers, and so we're always learning. We're not just the guru who sits on top and knows it all. You're trying to figure it out like everybody else, but you just share all these things that you've known through your seeking and curiosity over the years. Don't be afraid of mistakes. You mentioned the book, The Art of Possibility, which I'll have to link to in the show notes there. So I have to order a copy myself, it looks like now.
It's wonderful. You'll love it.
And now I'm trying to read my own. And I always like, you mentioned something about making mistakes on a small scale. Like that's one of the, actually, there's a blog post I've been wanting to write about, and it's something along the lines of like, are you either a musician or an author or whatever? Are you just starting out and you're in obscurity now, and you don't have a fan base? Congratulations, because this is your opportunity to try all kinds of stuff and make huge mistakes without having big consequences as a result. Because if you had a big fan base and you were experimenting and you had a failure, it'd be a bigger deal, or more impactful than you are at a small scale. So actually, there's some advantages to being early in your career.
Absolutely.
Right?
I just did an article about the power in being anonymous. And, we think that being an entrepreneur we want to be really visible. But that's really true. When you are anonymous, you have a kind of a different level of courage than when people start having expectations.
Right, as opposed to wanting to get there fast, and wanting to know what the quick fix is, and doing everything right, and being paralyzed by fear, which is what you're basically saying with, get over this fear of making mistakes. It's part of the journey.
Yeah.
That's how we learn and grow. And I love that take inventory every 90 days. Think about what's working, what's not. I think there's some kind of a system like that from Jack Canfield, where stop, start, complete, whatever. It's like, what do you want to start doing that you're not doing yet? What do you want to continue doing? What do you want to stop doing? And I think there were a couple other categories there, but those are helpful things to go over on a regular basis instead of just going through the motions, right? Because it's easy to get caught up in a routine, even as a self-employed entrepreneur.
Really is.
And you get stuck, right?
Yeah.
So, awesome. Did we cover all those success factors then?
I think we have.
I think we have too. All right, Barbara, let's continue along. But first, I think you were able to reach over and grab a copy of the newer version of Making a Living Without a Job. And there it is. Oh, there's that tie. I love the scissors.
The necktie.
With the tie. Because, the last job that I had, that I quit about 10 years ago, was a corporate gig, right? Yeah, I had to wear a white shirt and tie and wear the suit every day. And boy, talk about a fish out of water. It was a good experience in many ways, and just like the guy who used to stand there at the store, it made me realize this is not for me, and I'm not going to get comfortable with the salary and the paycheck and the health insurance. I gotta get out of here, and I used my frustration to fuel, the energy that it took to build up my business, and so
that is actually. Also, why I left teaching, which was my first real job. I was surrounded by people who had been in the same school district, in the same classroom for 20 years. Wow. And I can remember, even as a young teacher, thinking there's no light in their eyes. And after about 4 years of teaching, I thought, if I don't leave now, I might not be able to go. And I was really terrified to think that I was going to spend the next 40 years just having the same year over and over again. And that was far more frightening to me than the fact that I had no idea what I was going to do when I left.
Right, exactly. So the next question has to do with overcoming challenges, and maybe this ties into, I'm sure it does, into your earlier discussion of not being afraid of making mistakes. But why don't you share one of your challenges, one of your obstacles that you had to overcome, what you learned from it, and what we can learn from it too?
I think, at the very beginning, I decided I was going to, start this business on a shoestring. And I think my biggest investment was I maybe had business cards printed. I think that might have been it. And I decided my first business was I was going to do personal growth seminars for women. I had gotten really interested in personal growth and development thanks to my mentor. And I was probably, around 30 or so. And I couldn't believe when I started to learn about things like goal setting and self-esteem that I had been in school for so many years of my life and never had learned these things. Mm-hmm. And I started reading self-help books, and 35 years ago there were a lot fewer of those. So I read Think and Grow Rich, The Power of Positive Thinking, Think and Grow Rich, The Power of Positive Thinking. I had a very small library at that time. And the thing that happened when I started to expose myself to this kind of philosophy was I felt at home. Mm-hmm. It was like I never heard anyone articulate this, but intuitively I always knew this was how I wanted to live. And at that time, the women's movement was just really getting a lot of steam and visibility, but nobody was talking about that side of it. And all the personal growth stuff at that time was by men, for men. And I often would think, gosh, I wish a woman would talk about goal setting. And I had this epiphany. I'm going to be that woman. I mean, I can still see where I was when it hit me. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to start doing seminars specifically for women to share these concepts. Mm-hmm. And so the challenge was, I had no idea how you did that. The next challenge was, I have no credentials. Right. And I thought for a while maybe that meant I first had to go back to college and get a psychology degree, and decided, no, that really wasn't what I wanted to do. But the other thing that was big, and I still am mystified because I can't remember where this all came from, I decided I was going to start publishing a newsletter because I knew that in my own journey, I needed to be reminded over and over and over, or I backslide. And I thought a newsletter is perfect. Unlike a book that you read and finish and put down, newsletter keeps coming. And I don't know where I got that idea, Bob. I don't know I'd ever even seen a newsletter. And I certainly didn't know how you produced one. And so that was kind of big, but I was living in Madison, Wisconsin at the time, and I found this little print shop, and they had an IBM Selectric that you could come in and use, and I'd write it at home on my old electric typewriter. Then I'd go into the print shop and lay it out, and they would print it, and it was astonishing to me.
But that wasn't an early version of Winning Ways, though, was it?
It was a precursor, I think. Yeah, it was called The Successful Woman, and it was very successful. And so then and then, as I said, our businesses evolved. As I worked more and more with women, and they were talk about how they wanted to, climb the corporate ladder and get some, tear down those walls. I would just walk out of a seminar and think, you are so gifted. Why aren't you doing something on your own? And then, it just kind of evolved into more entrepreneurial things.
So the challenges were, that you overcame, as you mentioned, were not knowing what to do, which we all get these ideas.
There really wasn't a model that I could follow, at least not as there were no women doing the kinds of things I was doing. And that did not frighten me. But it was sometimes kind of frustrating because I just thought it'd be a little easier if I could see how somebody else had done it.
Right.
But
and there's a little section in my book, the DIY Career Manifesto, that it's actually called "Avoid the Credentials Crap Trap" or something. Something like that, where everybody feels that they're not worthy just because they're interested in teaching this topic. They need a degree or a certification to be taken seriously, and that's often, unless it's legally required, it's often not the case that you even need that.
Exactly. And I talk about that in my Establish Yourself as an Expert seminar, that we've really made a shift from credential-based expertise to experience-based expertise. And that I didn't know that's what I was doing at the beginning, but that's really what I was doing. I was taking my own experience and saying, I tried this and it worked. And when I started really thinking about what kind of business I wanted to have, and this was a little farther down the road, I remember writing down what I would never do. And one of the things, and it's been really strong for me, is I won't teach what I haven't learned. That's good. And so, I decided early on, really what it was about for me was that I was going to make my own life a laboratory and then report on my experiments.
That's fantastic.
Which ones turned out and which ones didn't. I'm going to be a guinea pig in my own life.
It seems to have worked out pretty well for you.
It has worked out. And I've discovered things that have startled and surprised me, and things I just soon forget.
All right, Barbara, the next series of questions, this is a 3-part question. If you could go back and have a conversation with your younger self, maybe when you were at the beginning of this, self-employment journey and trying to figure things out, 3 pieces of advice that you would give yourself. And I'll I'll list them real quickly, and then we'll take them on one at a time. But what would you tell or suggest that you do exactly the same? In other words, what worked? 2, what would you avoid completely? You know, these were time wasters. Don't go down that path. It's probably a mistake that a lot of people make. And then also, what would you add into the mix earlier, where now you're looking back, you realize, oh, I should have done that, a lot sooner. So let's take them. Let's just go back to the first one. What would you suggest to yourself and to other new entrepreneurs? What should they do exactly the same, or what would you do? Should you have done exactly the same?
I probably would have done everything exactly the same, but the one thing that and I don't know that there is a solution for this, I would have told myself, be really patient. Things that grow take time. And I often tell people in my seminars, this is kind of the curse of the entrepreneur, is that we have a vision, and when we have it and we're excited about it, we want it to manifest because we know it's going to improve and enrich our lives in some way. And that's perfectly normal. And at the same time, creating something marvelous is a process, a journey. And, Paul Hawken, who is one of my favorite entrepreneurial thinkers, said he thought the best training for becoming an entrepreneur was to garden. And I think gardening is just a brilliant metaphor for growing a business. And in fact, I have a little garden out here on my balcony that's just potted plants and flowers. But I remember last summer I was doing some deadheading and cutting off some dead weeds. And I suddenly had this thought, what else do I need to deadhead in my life? What other stuff is, hanging around that really is past its prime? And so I think that the whole thing, and we can know that patience is important on an intellectual level. Sometimes it's very, very hard to actually experience it and so this is the dichotomy as entrepreneurs. We have to be impatient and patient at the same time. Impatience keeps us active. Right. Moving, trying to get us closer. And patience is having that wisdom to realize that there are going to be twists and turns and detours along the way. And very often, it takes some experience where you can really look back and say, this is true. Sometimes the things that don't turn out are perfect.
Right. I think I've actually described it as constructive impatience. And with me, it's not about taking shortcuts or taking the fast track or whatever. It's more about, I have this idea, and what can I do to get it out sooner rather than later? I've used my impatience to get things out in the world before they're even perfect or ready, or this new book I keep referring to. I didn't wait till I had 50,000 words written and it was completely edited. I started giving away copies when I had 7,000 or 8,000 words written. So yeah, there are ways to speed things along, but you also at the same time, I almost that piece of advice could fall into what would you do the same? That'd be to have patience, or what would you avoid is to not be so be so impatient about
exactly. Because I was impatient at an earlier time, and I'm sure I probably said out loud, "Why is this taking so long? I know this is going to work." Right. But I am a lot more philosophical now.
Right, very, very, very good. So anything else, any of those 3 categories, what would you do the same? Or were there any time wasters that you'd avoid, or what would you have done earlier that you now realize would have been beneficial?
I don't know that there's anything I would have done earlier, Bob. We grow into it. We grow into different parts of our business. So that stumps me. I can't think of anything I'd have done earlier.
That's okay. Well, it sounds like for the most part, and this is a totally legitimate answer too. You really wouldn't want to change anything that you did along the way, because everything that you did led to who you are, where you are now, and that seems to have worked out fine. Right?
It's funny because I think, and I like to remind people of this, that if Somebody's story was she started a business. It was an instant success. She made a lot of money. She lived happily ever after. If that was a movie, we would be bored.
Right.
If that was a book, we would be bored. What are the interesting stories when you come back from a trip? The interesting stories are about all the screw ups and
Right.
challenges and goofy things that happened along the way. And I think as entrepreneurs, we have to realize we're going to be collecting those and we're going to tell those stories. Those are the best stories to tell, not about how everything just worked out.
Right. Great point.
It was so simple, just
It's glitch free.
glitch free.
Yeah, well, there's nothing, there's no wisdom to be gained from that, or nothing to pass along.
No.
Well, here's another question that I like to ask. Where you're an author, you're a writer, but I'm sure, but obviously you're a reader too. You've already mentioned a couple of books that have been impactful. But if you could pick another book, or maybe one you've already mentioned, and that changed your life, explain what that book is and why it had that impact on you.
There is one book, and I've talked about it, written about it a lot, that made all the difference for me. When I was at that point where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm on my third job and I'm bored with this. I don't know what I'm going to do. I read a little story in the newspaper one night about two women from New York who had started a business called Supergirls. And they started it in their apartment in New York. And this is years before I had ever heard that you could run a business from home. That was just an astonishment. And the article wasn't very long, but it mentioned they had written this book. And the next day I went to the bookstore, and to my astonishment, there was one copy of the book, Supergirls, the autobiography of an outrageous business, in the bookstore. To this day, I'm sure God put it there, because I don't think the bookstore would have been smart enough to stock it. I took it home, and I think I read it cover to cover 7 times.
Wow.
And I was absolutely blown away by what they had done. And their idea was very simple. They had moved to New York. They were college friends from Kentucky, and they were theater majors, and they'd gone to New York to become actresses, and they were doing things that out-of-work actors do, like working in department stores. And one night at a party, one of them said to the other, I've been thinking, we've got a lot of energy, we're imaginative, I think we should start our own business. And the other one, Claudia, said, what are you talking about? We don't have any money, how could we do that? And Jeannie said, well, I don't know, maybe we could start a business that didn't require any money. Maybe we could start a business where people would hire us to do creative projects that they didn't have anyone else to do them. And so that was how they started. And the business eventually evolved into a very successful public relations company. But they started out in Jeannie's apartment, and this was my favorite thing they did. They found a record called, and it was probably vinyl, called Sounds of the Office. And whenever their phone would ring, they'd put the record on first. So it sounded like Supergirls had the staff of thousands, and there were phones ringing and typewriters clanging, but it was just the two of them sitting in Claudia's
Hilarious.
apartment. Isn't that great?
I love it.
And at the very end of the book, they said something I think I memorized the first time I read it. They said, we didn't go to Harvard Business School. We didn't go to any business school, but we discovered we could learn everything we needed to know as we went along. And so can you. We didn't start out being super. We just wanted to be. And I remember the first time I read it, I'm getting all teary here thinking about it. I thought, if wanting to be is what it takes, I am highly qualified.
Wow. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and that book was so powerful, and it was even more astonishing after I started The Successful Woman. I advertised my newsletter. They used to have classified ads in the back of Ms. Magazine, and Claudia, one of the authors of Supergirls, saw my ad and tracked me down. and interviewed me for a magazine article she was writing about women who had started businesses.
Wow, how cool is
I
that
know,
to connect with them?
it was just like, can't believe Claudia Jessup is calling me.
But I love that concept about learning it as you go along, because I've heard this many often focus on the what and the why of what you're wanting to do, but don't get stuck in the how. It's actually a song that my girlfriend and I wrote with those lyrics in them. A lot of people get stuck in I don't know how I'm going to get that done.
I know. How is a dream bashing word?
Yeah, but if you focus on what and why.
Yeah. How are you going to do that? I tell people I'm making a living without a job that is what they're going to hear from the dream bashers around them. And the proper answer to the question, how are you going to do that, is, I don't know exactly how I'm going to do this, but what I'm going to do is, and go back to the vision.
And you'll figure it out as you go along. The road will be made clear once you start taking steps.
I think, too, I was on a conference call with some people last night, and they had been in a seminar together and were like reporting in, and there were a couple of them like, I haven't done anything, but this guy was talking, and he said, well, I had planned to have such and such done by now, but I've only got this much. But he'd done a huge amount in getting himself launched. And I said, how come we keep giving ourselves these deadlines for things that we've never done before? How are we so arrogant that we think we can predict how long it's going to take to do something we've never done before?
Good point.
And then we, get upset with ourselves when we miss a deadline. We've got to be a lot gentler with ourselves.
Great advice. All right, we've covered so much good stuff here. Just a couple more questions. But here's one that I added that I think is really important. And I know you've touched on it here, but I'm just going to ask you directly. It's like, what truly motivates you to do the work that you do?
I have kind of a big vision. And my big vision is, I would like to live in a world where everyone gets up in the morning excited about how they're going to spend their day. And we got a long ways to go with that one, making that happen. It breaks my heart to see people working and giving away big chunks of their life working at something that is not soul satisfying. My granddaughter is now 9, just turned 9, but I remember that almost immediately when she was born, I suddenly realized I had a new mission in my life. And my new mission was to make sure that nobody stole this little girl's dreams. And that I was going to protect that for her. And I mean, that was long before, that was when she was just born. And then when she was 3, it became really obvious that she was an artist. And even as a really tiny child, when she sat down to draw, she would just have this intense focus. And so that's really big for me. And she now is in public school, and all the time is dealing with kind of mediocre, conventional thinking. And so it's practically a full-time job for me to keep that flame burning and reminding her that she can choose a different path. And she's got 2 little brothers coming up behind, and I'm performing the same service for them. Awesome. And I think that matters hugely to me. And that also makes me conscious of the fact that I have to do that for myself as well. I can't become complacent. I can't say, okay, you've done enough, now stop. I've got to keep, I can't imagine not creating. I mean, I just can't.
That's awesome. That's a powerful vision to help people, but focus on your granddaughter, sort of your primary target person, but you have that same vision for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that's awesome.
And I mean, I was conscious of it with my own daughter. And I have a story in my book about when she was in college. I think her junior year, she called me up and she said, "You ruined me." I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, my friends are all going on job interviews. They're writing their resumes. I can't do that." I said, "I know, I did that on purpose." and at the same time, I knew she felt funny, that she had different motivation. But now she has a business doing something that she was born to do. She's a birthing doula. And I mean, just when she participates in a birth, she just sort of floats back home again afterwards, because that's just so where she needs to be. When you see that in action, it's really powerful. So, you've got, and I think that people don't realize when they go down this road how they start having an impact on other people, even people who are watching that they don't even know are watching. I remember when I moved to Minneapolis, I moved into an apartment. I'd been there maybe not quite a year. And I went into the office one day and they said, "We can't figure you out. You're such a mystery. You don't come and go at regular hours, but you're always smiling." And I just kind of laughed and I said, "Well, I have my own business." And they said, "Oh, we thought you were a kept woman." I said,
they couldn't fathom that you might actually be doing something on your own that you enjoyed. That's hilarious.
And I thought that they were, perplexed by this person who was always smiling and didn't leave at the same time and come home at the same time every day. And it was such a mystery to them. I'd like to live in a world where everybody's doing mysterious and wonderful things.
That's awesome. What a great mission. And then let's talk about future plans. So you've been very consistent in doing winning ways for so many years, and your workshops you've been doing. But do you have any future plans? Any big goals? Anything new or bigger that you have in store the next year?
I have a big new retreat I've been playing with that I think I'll be rolling out next year. I also formed an alliance, actually was sort of recruited by the folks at International Living in Ireland. And they've been around for quite a while, and mostly their work has been about information for people who are retiring and want to retire abroad. So it's been about investing in real estate. But they suddenly started to notice that a lot of younger families were coming into their network, and they were very interested in moving abroad and giving their kids that experience, living somewhere else for a while, but didn't know how to make a living. And they decided to start a new publication called Incomes Abroad. And so I'm kind of the muse for this new publication, and they're doing their first Fund Your Life Overseas conference in Phoenix this year in November that I'll be speaking at. So I've been doing some work with that. And I've always been passionate about the portable business travel aspect. And when I first started doing Making a Living Without a Job seminars, people would often come up at the end and say, what I really want to do is travel. And I realized along the way that the things that motivate us to travel, which is really our curiosity about the world, are the very same motivations we have for starting a business, that those two things are really parallel motivations. And so, bringing them together has been a huge source of fun for me. And it's also been a huge source of fun for me that I created a business that got a lot of stamps in my passport.
You are well traveled. And then finally, Barbara, where can people find you online? What's the best place to reach you?
I would say joyfullyjobless.com is the best place right now to find me.
And I love that website.
Facebook and Twitter, but
And so joyfullyjobless.com. And it's Barbara J. Winter. Making a Living Without a Job is the book. Winning Ways is the newsletter. You continue to publish in the print. How often does Winning Ways come out? Is it
6 times a year, and I am never not working on it. In fact, I'm on deadline right now. I've got an issue. It's got to go off to the printer early next week, and we got 3 pages naked yet. So
they will be filled, no doubt.
It will be.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, Barbara. It's been a thrill for me to reconnect with you, and I just want to again applaud you for the work that you've been doing and the mission that you've been on, and inspiring so many people to like I said in the beginning, to make a living by doing something that you are, and just bringing all your gifts to the table, because too many people just hold them back and just give in to what they have to do instead of what they should be doing to shine their light. So
it's funny, Mary Ann Cantwell, who is a new young friend of mine who has no permanent home. She travels the world and has a portable business, and she wrote a great book that came out last year in the UK called Free Range Humans, and she called me the grandmother of the self-employment movement.
Oh, wow.
I think that's a compliment.
You're the second person in the past week that's mentioned that book, so I'm gonna have to check that out.
It's terrific. I think you can order it in the U.S. It's wonderful.
Fantastic.
It's just brilliant.
I'll put that in the show notes too. So Barbara, thanks a lot for your time.
Good.
Take care. I'll be in touch. And this is Bob Baker saying so long for now. I'll be back with another interview soon. Until then, bye-bye.